and move from initiation to planning and start the planning process. And once we complete the planning and are ready to move to execution phase, we decide it's not worth building a solution for this project. It's not worth it. We can kill it before we move into execution, before we spend the money. Most of the money is spent in the execution phase. There is money spent in the planning phase to plan out, to design out, but then when we are ready to build in the execution phase, that's we start to actually funnel more funds out to pay expenses. All right, so we go into planning. After we get the team, we kick off, and the kickoff really is important to make sure we understand how we're going to plan out the design. Plan out the design for what we're going to be building, and then what and how we're going to do it by looking at the schedule. Now, to plan out, we need the requirements, right? We need the requirements, scope. So this is where we studied this stakeholder, is where we talked about identifying stakeholders. Then we go into scope, and scope starts with requirements, right? From requirement, we go into scope statement. From scope statement, we go into WBS. And then today we're going to talk about the schedule, which is down here. So we stop at WBS in the scope statement, and then we wait for scheduling, which is the next piece which we're going to do today. Now, once we have the WBS as part of the scope management chapter or scope management plan, we can start to look at the schedule. We can start to look at the risk. We can start to look at the cost. We can start to look at the quality. And we can also start to look at the resources. So WBS is the central entity, in which I always call that the secret sauce, because it contains all the deliverables that we have to tackle to design and build the project, or build the project in terms of build the solution. All right, so we jumped from scope to procurement. That's where we learned about the procurement process, and we all said procurement is hard. Procurement is hard because it has a process to solicit and select a seller, right? And I told Olivia before you guys joined this call that we're going to review procurement again because it's hard. And that's fine. So there are two main components in procurement. One is that we're going to select a seller, right? And the other one is the contract piece, the type of contract we're going to complete as part of this solution onboarding. So seller is the one who's going to bring the solution. We're going to onboard that solution or deploy it based on the contract. The contract is the basis for deploying the solution if we are going to buy. So there's a build and buy that happens in this, it happens here at business case. It starts at here, do you want to build or buy? And then scope, we again ask the same question. In procurement, we have the same question, build or buy. And another thing that comes out of procurement is the scope of work, SOW. SOW is part of scope procurement. Scope statement is part of the scope that comes out of the scoping. We got the requirement. We do the scoping here. So this is, you can take a snapshot of this diagram at some point before we go to the next slide. So this is a good way to sort of review scoping. You do the scoping and complete your scope statement. From scope statement, you generate your WBS, and which is nothing but deliverables. And then you start to plan out your quality, your cost, your risk analysis, which we're going to talk about today, risk analysis and schedule. And then we talked about quality also last week, a week or two ago, last week. We talked about the quality and that there are seven quality tools we talked about. Those are the main tools that you need to know in this chapter. 7 quality tools, and you should know the definition of quality and a couple of the definitions. And so we are now heading towards the risk and schedule now that we have the WBS sitting there waiting to be acted upon. So we are going to jump into risk first because that's an easy chapter comparatively speaking. And then we're going to spend the rest of the time today on the schedule chapter. And then on Wednesday, we're going to see what we didn't cover. We'll complete that and then jump into problems from both risk and schedule. That's for Wednesday. And then next week, we're going to jump into cost, and then cost and probably communication together. We're going to do cost and communication together. And cost is nothing but the budget, how we create the budgets. And communication is going to be a good chapter to review because 90% of project managers spend their time in communication. And then we'll be done. And then we're going to review the whole thing. We're going to review the whole thing from PMP standpoint and look at the hard fact, the most important critical stuff, so that you can you can just talk about it as if now that you know all of it. Now, then we'll try to connect everything. We'll try to connect to see, given a situation, how things sort of follow. And but what I've just described to you is that direction we're taking. That's the path. So this is the path to completing the project. Okay, so let's head to risk chapter. So we'll do a quick review of what this chapter is all about. And you can keep actually Titanic in your mind. Titanic. I know it's not very. Tell me who doesn't know about Titanic. Number one, anyone who doesn't know about Titanic should show me their thumbs up. Who does not know? If you know, okay. If you know, show me a thumbs up. Nobody knows about Titanic. Okay, Javier knows about Titanic. None of you. Ernisha, okay. Olivia, what about Takira? Do you know about Titanic or not? Okay, she doesn't know. All right, we'll touch a little bit about Titanic. I think who else we got here today? Azim, do you know about Titanic? Yeah, okay. So I think it's Takira who doesn't know. All right, that's fine. We can talk about Titanic. Titanic, I have actually a slide on it, and it's not in your stack, but it's okay. Let's go there. So I'm going to show you what Titanic looks like. Titanic is this. This is the ship that actually there is a it's all in a different language, so you won't be able to read it. But it was a ship that traveled from England to a port in America, and it. So if you look at on the right hand side, 1912 saved from Titanic, 100 years underwater, 100 years. So you can just imagine 1912 and 1923. That's almost 100 years, right? So what happened here? This was one of the most considered at that time to be the most robust, built very, very strong. They used to say that it can never break. This ship can never break. It was built so strong, and so what they did was they traveled from England to a port in America, and halfway in the ocean, Atlantic Ocean, almost halfway, actually a little bit more than halfway, the ship struck a iceberg and got damaged and sank. So keep that ship in mind when we talk about risk, because there was something they didn't do. And this sinking is one thing. Ship, okay, it got damaged and sank. Okay, why? That happened, unfortunately. But the disaster or catastrophe was that they did not have enough. Do you see these lifeboats right here? See these lifeboats here? They did not have enough lifeboats for everybody. See these? And you see there's a lot of space available here or more. They did not add enough for everyone. So when they were damaged and was sinking, they couldn't save everyone. So a lot of people died. And so we're going to keep that in mind because they did not do what we call in this chapter risk analysis. Did not do a good job of this. They may have done some risk analysis, but they didn't do a good enough job of risk analysis. And as a result, a lot of people died in this voyage to America. All right, so this is our Titanic. We're going to keep that in mind as we talk about this chapter. Okay, so what is the process? So first thing we always talk about is the process. So what do we do in risk? How do we do the risk analysis? What are the components? We always plan. Always, whenever we want to do anything, procurement, scope, schedule which is coming up, resource, cost, whatever, we have to plan it out. So as part of planning, the very first thing we have to do is identify the risk. Identify the risk. And this is the most important step. Where is the risk? The what? Where is the risk? We need to identify this entity, this component. So that's the first thing. And to do that, we have to look at the WBS, work breakdown structure, and see what are the main deliverables, and then we go into each of those deliverables to identify, holes, gaps. So what we're looking for are gaps, and once we find those events or risks are also called events. We put them in what we call risk register. Just like we have a stakeholder register, we have a risk register also. We put that information, all the identified risks, and how we're going to tackle those risks in the risk register. So if you have a PMP question and there are a number of answers, one of them is risk register, then you know that's the right answer. Okay. What tools do we use to identify them? Checklist, assumption analysis. We draw up the WBS. We do some SWOT analysis. Now, SWOT analysis is a very good tool for folks who don't know what a SWOT analysis is. And it's something you can use for anything. So SWOT, S for S. Who knows about SWOT analysis? Maybe they can help me. S stands for what? Okay, I'll tell you. Strength. Okay, were you gonna say that?
No, I was gonna be wrong. It's okay.
Okay, so strength is the S. W is for weakness. Strength, weakness, O for opportunity. And SWOT for threats. So you can for each element, you can put in the background the ship Titanic and say, what are the strengths of the ship? What are the weaknesses of the ship? What are the opportunities that we can explore positively? What are the threats that we need to prevent from happening? So whatever, if it's a house you're trying to build, put the house in the background and say, okay, let's do a SWOT analysis and find out the strengths, the weakness, opportunity, and threats. Look at yourself. Put yourself in front of the SWOT analysis and say, what are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? What are my opportunities that I'm not availing that I have? And what are my threats? What are the things that I'm doing or somebody can do to me? What are those things? And so if you're a politician, for example, they can, so they have threats all the time, right, from people. So knowing that that's a major component for them to kind of put in front of them, they will do a good job of analyzing their gaps. So all it does is analyzes your gaps, positive or negative. Remember, when we talk about gaps, we don't always emphasize on the negative, although by default we do. But because remember, we have these opportunities. We have to exploit our opportunities too, right? So the opportunities are all positive. Anyway, so going back to step number 1, as part of planning, you're going to identify your risks. What are my risks? What are the risks in this big ship Titanic that I'm building? What could go wrong, right? And then you are going to obviously look at the WBS. You can break it down and see the big deliverables, and then you can decompose that into tasks, and then look at that from all aspects. Now, you could also start doing your identification of risk at the very at the time you have the charter or the project initiated. You can start identifying risk at that point. And at that point, you don't have WBS. You just have the charter. And then when you go into planning, you have requirement as your first step. You could still identify risk while you are in the requirement collection gathering phase, because there may be a risk in the requirement process. What are those risks? And you are proactively tackling them. And then once you get down to the WBS, then you say, okay, I can see everything, because WBS is going to show you everything, right? So let's draw a WBS. And why do I say that? If this is the house, then you got these deliverables: plumbing, electrical, and then you got the foundational, you got the framework, and you got other things, right? Miscellaneous stuff. So you can say, okay, I got this big house. That's too difficult to analyze. Let's break it down into these deliverables. These are my major deliverables. And then I'm going to break it down. And how do I break it down? I decompose. This word decompose is very important to keep in the back of your mind, that I got to decompose these deliverables into its tasks. And the very lowest level and up is your work package. So you're building this. You have this bunch of work packages under each of these deliverables. So let's draw these work packages like a cloud. There's another work package here, work package here, work package here, work package. But you don't. When you talk about WBS, you don't. You mention all these things, but WBS really consists of the deliverables. So when it comes to the risks, like I said, you don't begin at the WBS level. You begin when you first complete your charter, because in the charter there is one component called assumption, and there's another component called risk. Assumption is also a risk because we are saying something without any facts. We are assuming something. So it's a risk. You got to explore that too. All right. So identification of risk, very critical. Now that you have identified, let's say you've identified risk in different categories. So you have risk categories now. You got the engine risk, you got the risk for plumbing, you got the risk for in electrical component area. So you sort of have divvied up the risk by analyzing each type of category of components, and then said, okay, what could go wrong in those categories? All right. So so this is the tool that you use to sort of identify, open up things to see what's inside. And then you put all the stuff in your risk register. Now that you have identified your risk, which I'm calling events, now risks are have a probability because they're uncertain. Risks are uncertain, so they have a probability. What do I mean by these things? Uncertain means risk you don't know for sure, right? You don't know for sure if that's going to happen. I'm building this house, but I don't know 100% that during the month of let's say September, a storm is going to be approaching. I don't know for sure, but it can, right? It can brew up somewhere in the Atlantic and start to head towards us. So there is a lot of uncertainty, and because things are uncertain when it comes to risks, we talk in terms of probability. Oh, there is a probability of 80% that the storm may be coming. Oh, there's a probability of 5% that a storm is approaching or hurricane is approaching Houston. So use probabilities. Probabilities go from 0 to 1. 0 to 1. Probabilities go in between that. All right. So that's that. Those are good concepts. We're going to review those again. Just throwing those out there because we're doing a sort of a high level overview here. So then once we have this data, or not data yet, we got these risks, right? These pieces of information that are uncertain, have certain and have probabilities to it. Okay, so then we look at which of those could be sort of categorized as a qualitatively. How can we analyze this risk qualitatively? So there's qualitative risk analysis and there is quantitative risk analysis. There are two types of you can perform risk analysis, and qualitatively, like the word indicates, qualitatively is where you say the traffic light turned green, the traffic light turned red. That's qualitative way of describing the traffic lights changeover. You could also quantitatively talk about, instead of saying light, you could say the probability of storm coming is 20%. So now you are talking in terms of quantity. So it's quantitative. It's not qualitative anymore. It's quantitative now. You're talking in terms of numbers, data. Before you were talking in terms of high, medium, and low. His height is high. Well, let's say high. Let's say the temperature was high, the temperature was medium, the temperature was low. I didn't say the temperature was 100 degrees or 50 degrees or minus 10 degrees. Had I said that, then I would be doing quantitative risk analysis, not qualitative. So keep those things in mind, because when you have an event in your hand to analyze, you can analyze it both ways. You can analyze it by saying, yes, it can happen. No, it cannot happen. Yes and no. That will be qualitative analysis. Or you could say it is hot. It's going to be hot at this time of the year, and you can specify how hot. Or it's going to be cold, and you can specify how cold. And you can even talk in terms of probabilities. High probability of 80%, low probability of 20%, 10%. So you can talk in terms of probabilities when we talk about quantitative risk analysis. Okay, so we're going to revisit these things that I'm talking about. But right now, you can make some notes here and say probability when it comes to the quantitatively, pure BI probability. When it comes to qualitative, it's basically yes and no. High, medium, low. All right. So again, you're going to put all this information back into the risk register after you do these two types of analysis. Now, the SWOT analysis is what type of risk analysis? Who can tell me? Is it qualitative or is it quantitative? Going once.
It's quality, not quantity.
Yes, it's quality. It's not quantity. There's no numbers here. When you see numbers, then it becomes quantitative. When you don't see numbers, you see strengths, quality, strengths, as strength. I mean, if you describe somebody's strength, that would be qualitative description, not quantitative description, right? And when you talk about weakness, it's again, the weakness of a Titanic is that they didn't have enough ships for the passengers. Again, qualitative analysis. All right, so I think this is good so thus far. So you do perform these two type of analysis on the events that you have come up with in discussion with your team. So when you do your first kickoff, you have your charter, you kick off the project, you bring your team together, and you start to talk about the design and the first one is requirements first. From requirements, you jump to scope statement, and then WBS, then design. So you are also, as it giving you information, you have in back of your mind this risk factor in the back of your mind, and you always keeping your ears open to risks. If somebody's saying something, okay, another thing I want to tell you right now, the difference between risk and an issue. Who can tell me the difference between risk and an issue? What's the difference? Main difference?
I can.
Go ahead.
Risk is before it happens, issues after it happens.
Yes. So if today, right now, as I'm talking to you, my laptop, let's say, crashes, that's an issue. And on the other hand, if I'm thinking that in my mind that what if my laptop crashes, what would I do? So I'm thinking in my mind the probability of laptop crashing on me today is probably 0.01%, very very low. That's quantitative analysis. I'm thinking about it, and it's a risk because it's all that has not occurred, something that has event that has not occurred but could occur, can happen, right? So given this example, I think should become more clearer to you as to what this risk is all about. But no worries, we're gonna explore this even further. All right, so we talked about the how we analyze the risks, the two types, qualitatively, quantitative. Now, when it comes to qualitative analysis and quantitative analysis, when you're analyzing risk, you don't have to analyze it both ways. Sometimes you don't have data. So if you don't have data, then it's always going to fall into the qualitative analysis bucket. But if you have data, then you can just say, hey, I've done quantitative analysis also. And obviously quantitative analysis is more expensive to do because you got to find data, Google or pull up some research paper or do some experiments to get the data. So quantitative analysis is expensive to do. Qualitative analysis is easier to do. And usually in the projects, we hardly ever do quantitative analysis, hardly ever. Although we can assume some probability numbers, we can assume some of those, but we don't have real facts, real research behind it. And so we resort to using qualitative analysis. All right, so that should be clear now. Now that we have done the analysis qualitatively and quantitatively, the next step is to come up with a response. So how do we act? Now that we know all this, how should we act given this situation? We got a risk that we're thinking may happen. And what if it does happen? What is the response? Right? So going back to Titanic, when they all got on board, somebody was doing some risk analysis, I'm pretty sure, but they didn't do a good job. And if, let's say, they did some risk analysis and they did provide some boats, some small boats for that reason. So the response was to build some boats. That was the response, right? For them, they built some boats, and that was in response to the risk event of that ship sinking, right? So that was the response to that. Now let's see, there are about 4 or 5 responses really that you have to be worried about, and we look at those no matter what the risk is, and then you say, okay, given these 4 or 5 responses, which one should I choose? Now, I can give you a very good example of a risk response that we do. I mean, we okay, especially with those people who are driving. All of us are drivers, right? We all have a car or some kind of vehicle. So we know there's a probability that we can crash into another car, or another car can crash into us, or whatever, or something else. So knowing that, and the city also knows that, city wants to enforce that we take a risk response of some sort, and the one that they have offered us is insurance. So we all buy insurance, whether it's plain old vanilla liability or full coverage. That is a response to an event that has not happened yet. Risk is something that has not happened yet. So insurance is that response. Okay. All right. So that's what risk response is about. And then control. Control is okay. So how can we keep an eye on this? How can we, in the project, we have done the qualitative analysis, we have done the quantitative analysis by looking at the WBS, looking at the requirements, looking at the charter, looking at the scope statement, looking at the schedule, looking at the budget. We've done a risk analysis, and put the and have 4 or 5 or 6, 7 risks identified, and then looked at each one of them. We started to say, the response to this one is going to be this, response to this one is going to be this, whatever the case may be. Now that we have this risk register with this data, somebody is supposed to review that and keep an eye on it, right? So if something happens, they'll go back to this risk register, open it up, and say, hey, we already did the risk analysis, and this is what we're going to do. If the pipe breaks down and the water leaks in the house, this is what we got to do. If a hurricane comes, this is what we got to do. And so all of that is in there. The controlling is all about keeping an eye on that risk register and making sure that the risk is controlled. We control the risk by giving somebody ownership to this risk. We can say, Tom, you are the analyst in our team. I'm going to make you the owner of this risk register. Your job is every week you look at the risk register and make sure that none of those risks are going to happen. Just make sure. And so we put indicators in the risk register sometimes, which automatically can trigger us of events that may be happening or coming up. If, for example, we had a system where it was connected directly to the weather system, and so if the weather was turning out to be, worsening or turning out to be bad, it's going to send a signal to the risk register somehow, and risk register is going to send an email to the team that, hey, watch out, the bad weather is coming, be alert, come up with mitigation plans because bad weather is on the horizon. All right, so that's all about controlling. So this is the whole chapter, but just to give you in about 10-15 minutes is the whole chapter. So what else is there? There's some more details that we're going to go over, but I'm going to go over kind of fast because it's not very difficult. So I'm going to pause here for a minute and see if there's any questions. Easy chapter so far?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not like procurement, so we're good.
Looks like Olivia has a question.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
No. I meant to do thumbs up. I'm sorry.
Okay, all right, good. All right, so let's now let's go into the book. So the next stuff you'll see is stuff that's in the book. The book has all of these different terms. See all these terms? It has all these terms, and you got to know what they are. So definition, we're going to talk about the definition of risk. And I gave you a bunch of hints about that definition. I mentioned the word probability. I mentioned the word uncertainty. So keep those in mind. Okay, then we'll talk about the watch list. Watch list is where you put so there are two types of list. One is in your risk register, where you're actively following those, manning those, putting them in your radar. Those are your active risk events. Watch list is something that you have as a secondary. I mean, it's on this side. You have some other stuff, other risks that are not very important, and you don't want to ignore them. They're just on your watch list, but not to be ignored, but kept in the watch list and not controlled yet. You're not controlling them because you don't think they're significant, right? So that's what the watch list is really for. Risk owner is the person or team that is going to be assigned the risk register. You're responsible to make sure if risk happens, I'm going to come to you and ask you what should we do. Now, another thing that may come in the exam is there's always this assumption that if something goes wrong, that they are always going to assume that you have a risk register with a solution in there. So if something goes wrong in your project, and that's part of your problem in your PMP exam, your assumption should be, I'm going to go to my risk register and see what I got to do next to solve this. Not like, okay, I'm going to scratch my heads and start to figure out the problem or answer to the problem. No. So that's the assumption by the Project Management Institute, that you're doing a good job of doing risk analysis while you're in the planning phase. Actually, you got to start from the beginning, but while you're in the planning phase, and then that risk analysis, and that you have a risk register, and then once you get into execution phase, you are ready for anything going wrong. If anything goes wrong, you go and look up that's the first step you're going to do. Go to your risk register and see if what you should do next. Okay, keep that in mind. So we talked about the threats, we talked about the opportunities, we talked about the SWOT analysis. So SWOT analysis is a tool to identify your risks, So risk factors, we can talk about risk factors, risk appetite. How much risk can you take? Risk appetite. How much risk can you take? Can you climb the mountain? Or if, let's say, you're given the chance, will you climb the mountain? Will you bungee jump? I don't know how many of you are going to bungee jump given the chance to do it. I'm not. My risk appetite is not that high. So my threshold of risk is low from that point of view. But climbing a mountain, maybe. So every company has a risk appetite. Every company. Just like culture, every company has a culture. Some companies are very risk averse. The word is averse. They don't like risks, especially in the hospital arena. Because they have to deal with patients, they're very risk averse. They don't want to take any chances, or they'll get sued, right? And not only get sued, the patient will, because of the patient, obviously. So that's what these terms are trying to sort of allude to. Spike, we talked about the spike. I'm not going to say more about spike. I have a slide on that one. 8, 9. These terms are used as part of the agile methodology. Agile, spike. Fast failure, I'm going to leave that alone also. So I'm going to go through all of these. So these are the 18 plus 16 topics that we're going to cover today, sort of quickly, and stop where we need to stop. And this is coming from your book, and all of these are in the book on the very first page of risk. And let me go there right now, because this way, if there are some pages that I may refer you to go to, so you can also so we can do something together from the book. It's on page 371. 371. All right, moving on. Definition of risk. Project risk can be negative or positive. So and risks are uncertain, and they all have some probabilities. Those are additional definitions, but the one that's in the book is this. So make sure you understand risks are not all negative; they're positive as well. Prevention is better than solving problems. So you don't want to catalog all your risks. You want to make sure you don't have them. So prevention is always preferred over solving for risk. Uncertainty, high, low probability, hurricane. So we talked about uncertainty, and obviously that's is one of the definitions of risk. Risks are uncertain. So here there are two examples of people who have a high risk appetite. She's doing a bungee jump here, and he is parachuting down here. Now, the keep thing. So even though they are taking this risk, they're mitigating it at the same time. You see all this stuff right here, all of the stuff here in the back here, that's their safety right here. So she's mitigating her risk by having all of these safe handling components here. Same thing here. Even though it may appear to you that he only has one parachute, I think he has a parachute behind him also, right here. So that's how he is. That's his risk response right there in the back. He has another parachute in case this parachute doesn't open up. He can always resort to using that parachute. All right. So we talked about Titanic. We're going to keep coming back to it. All right. So what's next? Next is the watch list. So I did talk about the watch list. Watch list is an event that do not have a response yet. It's there. It's probably not significant. And because it's not insignificant, we haven't put a response to that one. So that's what that is. Risk owner number 2 is responsible to make sure that if the risk does happen, what to do, about the risk. Is responsible. It's almost like accountable. It's responsible. He's a responsible person, and you have to assign the risk to the person or to the team. I would say assign the risks to individuals who then become the risk owners. Risk can be positive or negative, and if they are positive, there are opportunities. And so you will see in projects that there are a lot of risks, but there are opportunities there of improving the efficiency of the work that's done in the project. There you may think that one risk could be that we may not make it, fall behind, slip, but then given that risk, we could say, let's work in such a way that doesn't happen. Even though that's a risk, let's use that let's exploit that risk and do our planning in such a way that we don't ever have to face that risk of being behind on our schedule. Risk factor. So risk factor has to do with impact. And that's very important, this word impact. Impact goes with probability. So let's say the probability of storm hitting Houston is 20%, which is qualitative is low, right? That's low. But if it does strike, the impact is going to be high, qualitatively or 0.9 probability. See that? I've shown you in both qualitatively and quantitatively. Probability 0.2, impact 0.9, probability low, impact high. These kind of, and this is equals to risk. And it'll give you if you do a numeric, it'll give you a numeric number, and that is considered the risk score. Okay, so that would be considered as the risk score. Risk score is good to know, and it comes from multiplying the impact with the probability. When you multiply this, you get a score. So if you were, let's say, trying to solicit for a solution from outside, getting a third party to solution provider, and you go through the procurement process, and you go through the procurement process and start scoring them based on their evaluation. You score them, and you give, you come up with a score of 90%. So now that you have the score, you can use that score to make decisions. Same thing for risk. If you know the probability and the impact, you get a score, then now you can make some decisions on the score. If the score is high, maybe you'll say, I'm going to put some money aside in case we do have a hurricane. Just in case there's an impact, we may have to maybe have to replace some stuff or repair some damage. I'm going to put aside some money based on the score. So keep that in mind. Scoring is going to help you identify the impact and also identify the cost of the impact. So the thing to remember here is that score is equal to impact times probability, and the score really defines the risk quantitatively, not qualitatively, quantitatively. All right, so let's come back here. So we talked about risk averse. Averse meaning I don't like risks. I'm risk averse. That goes back to risk appetite, right? Whether you like or you don't like risk. Then short term. Okay, so we talked about spike. Spike is a term they use. Agile uses that term. It means a short iteration to solve a technology or complex problem. So let's say you're trying to deploy a technology. Before you deploy the technology wholeheartedly, you want to do a spike, do a little bit of it to see if it's going to work or not. So that's what spike means. Do a small sprint to do proof of concept. And if the proof of concept comes out okay, positive, you do the next sprint and continue. Otherwise, you stop. You say, hey, this technology is useless. We did a spike and the results were bad. All right, proof of concept, spike, all mean sort of same thing. So in the backlog, so if you all remember that in the agile methodology, you have a thing called the backlog, right? There's a bucket called the backlog. That's where you put, what do you put in here? So user stories, right? User stories. You put user stories, which are nothing but requirements. In the agile, they call them user stories. You put them in the backlog, and then you do your risk analysis, and then you can, based on the risk analysis, you could prioritize your user stories. So you know which user story you want to work on first based on the priority. And so that's how you do your risk analysis in agile. You look at your backlog, look at each user story, and you do risk analysis on each user story. So to compare that with the predictive methodology, you're doing your risk analysis with the WBS, the work breakdown structure, the secret sauce, and you're looking at the deliverables, and that's how you're determining the risks by looking at each component there. All right, so just to give you both perspectives, how risk, in both cases, you have to decompose. Even if you have a user story in the agile, you look at the user story, you decompose, and then you do your risk analysis. In the predictive or waterfall, you take the WBS, you decompose into its respective tasks, and then you do the risk analysis. Decompose, risk analysis. Decompose, risk analysis. All right. So the word decompose is important to keep in the back of your mind. We can bring it up when we do the scheduling chapter next. Fast failure is good. So in Agile, if you can make something fail fast, that's a good thing. Just like when you do a test drive, if you go at 90 miles an hour, 120 miles an hour to make sure that it's working well, it's going to go at that rate. And if it fails, that's a good thing because something is wrong with this engine. So that's what it means by fast failure. You quickly you attempt to do a test for early detection. Early detection. All right. So planning process. We are sort of talked about the planning, which is right here, and strategy. How I'm going to do risk analysis. We have this process right here, right? That's going to be a strategy. Methodology. We already know that's going to be a methodology. We're going to maybe look at the WBS and look at the cost, look at the requirements, look at the WBS. I'm sorry, not cost. Then procurement. Look at in the procurement, we're going to look at the contract for any gaps there. In the requirement, we're going to look for any gaps there. In the cost, we're going to look for any budget gaps there. What else we got? Communication gaps. We haven't done the communication yet, but in all the knowledge areas, you can see each knowledge area, you're going to use the WBS as a way to get to it. Now, when we have the requirements, if you notice, requirements has two parts. The functional part, if you remember, and there is the non-functional part. Non-functional part is the stuff that's behind the scenes, the hardware, the hard stuff, stuff that you cannot see. The functional is all the features of the application, the features, stuff that a user is able to see and work on. It's all visible. Nothing is hidden. It's functional. Function. Anything that a user can use to get value from. That's what functional means. All right. So requirements. You have these big two buckets here: functional stuff, non-functional. Functional stuff could be training, could be functional, right? Training, build, testing, all that's functional stuff, right? Non-functional could be a laptop, building of the laptop, the network, the database, everything behind the scenes. Okay, so when you're doing a risk analysis, you can looking at all of these things and seeing if there's something here that can go wrong, or you can look at all of these things and see if any of these things can, if they break, what you're going to do. So so this is before you even get to the WBS, right? WBS is down here. Scope statement is right here, right? And then scope statement, you get WBS. So you can start the risk analysis at this stage even, and then go into your scope statement, start scoping what's in, what's out. That's what scoping is, right? But what's in, what's out. And I'm going to focus on the in, and then you do your breakdown, decompose here. You do your decompose here, and then you finish your risk analysis. All right, so these things we sort of looked at. Eventually, we're going to track, which is control, right? So these things we're going to touch. We already touched on these things. Identify risk. We talked about that, so I'm not going to go too much into it here. Again, I said you can all 10 knowledge areas, right? Schedule is one of them. Cost is another one. Scope is another one. Resource is another one. Customer satisfaction. So easy answer would be draw the triangle: cost, scope, time, quality, risk, customer satisfaction. Okay, do a risk analysis on each of these at a minimum. All right, so this is something I just slapped on before this class. to see if this will highlight some things. So anything that's red obviously is high risk stuff. It's all qualitative, and here it's all, you see probabilities here, right? Or technical risks. So these are probabilities, and so this is quantitative analysis, right? Quantitative analysis. This is quantitative analysis. This is qualitative analysis right here. And then once you have those two, then you can say, okay, let's try to put together some cost. If something does happen, how much is going to impact me? The impacts. Remember, we said impact analysis, impact time response. We said score is equal to impact times probability, right? Score, which is equal to risk. And once you get the score, you can say, if this happens, it may impact might be $50 million or greater than $50 million. Or if the impact is 4, maybe I have to spend this much money to mitigate that, solve that problem if it happens. If it's a lower, less money. 1, less than 200K. So that's the one way you can do the impact analysis quantitatively to determine the cost if that thing does happen. Now, in the case of the car insurance, with liability and full coverage, that maximum you can lose the car and your life, or you may have to go to the doctor, whatever. So that's the cost, right? That's the cost. Maximum is full coverage and full health cost. Minimum would be just the liability. See that? Just the liability. Maximum would be depending on the score, how bad it is. Impact. How bad was the impact? If the impact was high, more you have to spend more money. Impact was low, less money. So what type of insurance do you want? So that's up to you, right? And so when you're doing a project, you have to look at project like that. So that's why you have to do risk analysis to make sure that you're covered. You're covered for things going wrong. Now that's why you plan also. Everything you do in a project, even hiring the PM, is risk mitigation. If there was no PM, obviously there are going to be issues. So if there's no, if you don't put together a good schedule, risk. If you don't put together a good budget, risk. If you, what else? If you don't get a good third-party solution, that's a risk. Everything can be a risk, right? Anything and everything can be a risk. That's why we plan a project. That's why we do a project in the way we do a project, right? We could say, hey, we don't need a PM. We can do it ourselves. That's how it used to be. But not anymore. People are spending a lot of money on these projects and they want to make sure they're done well. And the way to actually come up with a good plan, you have to surround the good plan. If this was a good plan, you got to make sure it's risk proof. That's difficult, right? That's very difficult. But you can try to make it at least 80% risk proof, right? 80 to 90%, if not 100%, right? All right. So here we're talking about where we're putting the risk. We're going to put in the risk register. Risk register, if you open it up, has risk event, triggers. Triggers are important. Triggers are like signs. Triggers are like signs or causes or signs. So what is a trigger that hurricane is going to be coming to Houston? What is a trigger? Well, weather report, right? Weather report is your trigger. Keep an ear on that. Keep listening to the weather, and that's your trigger. So it's good to have the trigger in your risk register. Put it in there. Impact. What's my impact? Put the impact number in there. When it can possibly happen. let's say a hurricane starts in Houston, I think from July to December, something like that, July to November. So you can say this risk is going to be high between July end and November, the when part. And when it's not going to be risky, you can put that there, you know. So that's the kind of thing that you put in the risk register. All right, so we talked about the qualitative. So now it should be very clear to you. Here in these test tubes, there is no mention of any data, any numeric data, numeric. So everything is qualitative. This is a solution. This is supernate. This is precipitate. This is suspension. So they're qualitatively describing what's in these test tubes. So you use low, medium, high. No, you don't indicate probabilities. You don't indicate impacts in a qualitative analysis. And all of these things are qualitative. All of these are qualitative. Your documents are qualitative. Your plan, which is just a document, assumption log is a qualitative. Risk report is qualitative. Risk register without the numbers is qualitative. Issue log is qualitative. Watch list is qualitative. All of these things are qualitative. There's no data included in any of these. Quantitative. So quantitative, you have EMV. So EMV is what I said. Score. I said is equal to the score, and is equal to impact times the probability. We looked at that earlier. So it's called EMV. EMV is what EMV. Somebody look this up. I forgot what EMV means. Let's see.
Expected monetary value.
There you go. Thank you. Expected monetary value. I should write this here. Expected.
Statistical technique used in risk management to quantify the potential impact of uncertain events on a project.
Yeah. So simple to understand is simply expected monitoring value is a quantity that you can derive by multiplying probability with impact. Okay, you do that some multiplication and you get your EMV, and based on the EMV you can associate a dollar amount. Okay, so if EMV says it comes to 1.4, then you say that means maybe $10,000 if something goes wrong with this particular risk A. So we're calculating the risk, the EMV of risk A, and it is 1.4. And we have determined that if it's 1.4, it's going to cost us $10,000 to fix this problem if it happens, if something wrong. I mean, not something positive, something negative. So that's what EMV is for. So when you're doing a project, you can calculate the EMV of a risk in your project and find out how much that EMV is. Based on that number that you arrive, you can calculate the cost of repair if that risk happens. Okay, that's how you use the EMV. So this is all you need to know from an examination standpoint. What EMV is, expected monitoring value, how do you use it, and what it tells you, and this one, whatever it tells you, you can equate a dollar amount to that, and that's and then your budget. You can say if my budget. Let's say if you're doing your budget, and you aggregate all your costs, you can add to that cost your EMV cost also. Okay, and that's your total budget. This is all your costs, I is equal to 1 through n, all your aggregated cost for all the components in the deliverables, equipment, laptop, phone, whatever, all the cost of all resources, people. So plus the EMV, cost of your risk. Okay? And this way you have a good budget if something goes wrong, no worries, I'm insured because I put $10,000 in my budget. So that's one way. That's one way of safeguarding yourself. The other ways, we'll look at other ways also. So this tornado diagram, look in the book, page 297, it'll give you, this is also another way to quantitatively figure out what your risk is. You can use a tornado diagram. All right. So I'm just going to bypass that one. Decision tree. So let's look at decision tree. Let's just take a simple example so you understand what a decision tree is. So in the book, on page, so tornado diagram is on page 381. It's not 297, it's 381. This is. Okay, so the decision tree example is on 383, not 299, it's 383. That must be the previous book. All right, so yeah, that's probably where it came from. So this is a good example. So keep the example simple, but try to focus on the simple example to understand the concept. So let's put it here. So this is the box here, and let's go here. So if a failure happens, the EMV is 35% times 120K. That's your EMV. If the failure happens, if the failure doesn't happen, zero, no cost. So this is your decision point. So the other option is you go to the other option here. If a failure happens, so this is almost like this is your option A, and this is your option B. So you're drawing a tree here. This is called decision tree. Decision is it sort of looks like something like this. So on option B, if a failure happens, the EMV is 0.7. Probability impact is 450,000. Whatever the number is, that's your EMV for this. And if the failure doesn't happen, zero cost. So if you are trying to, let's say, buy 2 cars, okay, that's a good example. Let's say you're buying let's see which one would be good. Yeah, okay. This is a bulletproof car. And this is a normal, regular, standard car. And so you're comparing which car should I buy? A bulletproof car or standard car from a risk standpoint, which would be less risky? And how would you come up with a number, a quantitative number, not qualitative, quantitative? You can say, if this risk happens, if somebody tries to shoot me while I'm driving this car, whether it's bulletproof or not, what would be my EMV? So you calculate the EMV. In this case, where it's a bulletproof car, your probability of getting killed is 0.35%, and this is the cost. And so you have a EMV. This is like whatever that amount is. Let's come with a number. Let's say 150. That's not correct, but let's say 150. Here, for option B, standard car, and you know that if you drive this car, your probability of getting killed is high, so you get a low EMV. Let's say it's 100 here, $100, 150. So because this EMV is high, you're going to go with bulletproof car. Because the EMV is high, because this calculation versus the calculation for a standard car, you're going to say, hey, I'm going to go for it because the risk for me driving in this area of town is low if I travel in a bulletproof car, and it's going to be high if I travel in the same street of the town in a standard car. And so let me calculate my EMV and using decision tree, and my decision is that because my EMV is high here versus here, I'm going to go with this. So the value, expected monetary value, is high there versus this. So that's one way to use it. And so in the exam, they may give you EMV value is 200,000 of this, and EM value expected monetary value is 100,000. You know, pick which one you're going to go with. You know, kind of thing. All right, so moving on. Response. So response is the last part. This is the part I was saying that once you know what your qualitative is, once you know what your quantitative risk is, you need to figure out what are my response options. So keep this in mind. You got to keep this in mind. So here are the options here. If it's a threat, avoid, mitigate, transfer, pure risk, secondary risk. So if it's an opportunity, exploit. These are your options for mitigating. Enhance, share, escalate, accept. And there's an exercise 12.3. I want you to do it on your own. That sort of would describe these. So basically what they're saying is, if you have a risk, if risk is here, if this is your risk, depending on what it is, do you want to avoid? Do you want to mitigate? Do you want to transfer, like insurance? In insurance, when you take an insurance, you're transferring the risk. Remember that. When you are taking an insurance, you're transferring the risk. Mitigate always means solve. And that's usually the best solution. Mitigation is the best solution, and it means to solve. Avoid is also a good way to mitigate threats, right? Avoid, you're on the road and there's traffic jam, and you already know beforehand, so you avoid that street. You take a detour, right? So you're avoiding the risk. Pure risk and secondary risks. Now, secondary risks are, so you got the primary risk. You got the primary risk, and then you have a secondary risk. You took care of the primary risk, but then something, almost like a side effect. This is your side effect. Primary risk is what you solved the primary risk, but when it did occur, something else happened. A secondary risk happened as a result of the primary risk. So primary risk, you took care of it, no problem, but it triggered a secondary risk. And now you have to deal with that. So once you come up with a plan for your risks, make sure you have a comprehensive plan.
I have a good example. I have a good example of that.
Sure.
So the primary risk was we lose a development resource. The secondary risk is, it's easy to fix. We just bring another resource. The secondary risk is we lose the knowledge of what was happening at the time. And bringing a second resource, it will take some time to ramp them up. So secondary risk is we'll lose a week or a week and a half, 2 weeks, whatever of knowledge transfer or
Excellent.
just
I like
catch up.
Yep, I like it. So I hope everyone understood what Javier just spoke of. So that's how you deal with primary and secondary. I'm going to give everyone a break here because we're almost at the end of the risk. We're going to go into the schedule after we come back from the break. So let's come back at 8 o'clock. Let's get something, coffee, whatever you guys want. All right, so be back 8 o'clock.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله. الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح.
Okay, 8 o'clock. Olivia is here. I'm hoping everyone else is back. Anisha is back. What about Letras, Azim? Letras is back. Azim. Okay, Masin is here. Takira is here. Javier is hopefully back. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to, in next hour, we will try to finish as much as we can this next chapter on schedule. It's a sort of lengthy one, and I want to show you a lot of stuff, good stuff. So we'll just try to do as much of the concepts as we possibly can in next hour, and then when we meet on Wednesday, we'll finish it off. I'll show you an actual schedule also in Microsoft Project, so it sort of gives you a visual as well, and we'll try to make it simple enough that you can understand, remember for your PMP. All right, so let's hit it. Azim is back. Okay, so let's go back and pull up the same PowerPoint, and I'm going to move forward beyond some of the stuff that's still part of risk, which we already kind of know. So that's extra stuff that you can read up on. Nothing that is going to make or break your learning. Okay, so let me just speak on some of these things that reserve analysis. So reserve. So let's talk about reserve and burn down. We already seen the burn down chart. We're going to see again in schedule. Monitoring the risk matrix, which is risk register, right? Risk register. That's what we monitor. Reserve analysis. So you have reserves, right? This is your budget. This is your budget, and you have two types of contingencies. You have one contingency that is a reserve. The other one is called the managed reserve. Managed reserve. One is a contingency and one is a managed reserve. Now, managed reserve is really not part of your budget. The contingency reserve is. So you have your budget aggregate of all your tasks, right? Or task and tasks, resources, components here. Plus, if you have any EMVs, you put your EMVs, or EMVs would be part of your task. It would be it's part of that task. You would have it separate, and then you have the contingency reserve. Maybe contingency could be 10%. You put on top of your budget, and that becomes your budget. This managed reserve is in case, let's say you're in a project and you in execution phase, you need additional dollars. And you look at your contingency reserve first and see if you have the extra dollars in there in reserve that you can use. Once you use up your contingency reserve which is part of your budget, then you have to resort to using managed reserve. It's called the managed reserve. Okay, that's all you need to know at this point in time. And so it's a risk, right? It's a risk. It's a risk if you have used up your contingency reserve, which is also sort of a risk mitigation thing. You mitigate your budget risk by having some extra money there called contingency reserve, which is, let me just write this down, contingency, CONTINGENCY. So that's how you mitigate your budget, by having contingency money added to it. And also you've done your EMV and you put that as part of your task component, risk component, and task budgeting. So, but if you run out of your contingency, you are then left to your management for them to pool their managed reserve. So management can pool additional dollars from their reserves. It is not going to come from your project reserves, which is your contingency, but from an additional resource. That's all you need to know. And what are all these things? These are risk mitigation strategies. These are there to mitigate risk that you may have in your budget. when you run out of money. Unplanned events happen and you run out of money. So workarounds is also sort of a risk mitigation plan. So what is workaround? So you're going to let's say you're trying to build a component, it breaks down. That means your plan was poor, and now what do? You have to have a workaround. So if your plan was good, you would not need a workaround. Because your poor planning or whatever may be the reason, you're resorting to a workaround. All right. Risk assessment, we already know, qualitative, quantitative. That's what risk assessment is. Risk reviews and audits, these are part of your quality. You have two things in quality: quality control, quality assurance, and quality control. QA and QC. QA is your when you verify, when you test. That's QA. I'm sorry, I take this back. Verify and test is quality QC. QA is your audits, or you do validation. Okay, so sometimes, so that's what it is. So again, those are risks too. Those are risks, quality risks. Okay, so exercises you can do on your own, and there's some additional stuff here next to a couple of slides. And this is also helpful. I put that stuff there that will help you with some of the questions. All right, let's move on to the new chapter. On schedule. Where is it in the book? Let me go there first so I can refer to it as needed. So let me. You also all of you who have a book.
189.
89.
189. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I'm going there. I'm there. All right. So the very first thing I'll look for is actually no, it's not 189. Which book am I? 10th. Okay, I'm looking at 10th. So the 11th. 11th. Okay, where's my 11th?
11th is 189.
Okay. All right. So there we go. 1 second. Let me pull up my 11th.
Okay, the 10th is 169.
Yep, I'm not looking at 10th anymore. I'm looking at the 11th. 11th,
Okay.
thanks. All right, so 11th, 189, like you said. So quick test. So we'll get to quick test in a second, which is on 189. But let me give you an overview to get things rolling here. So you have a clear understanding before we get into it. So first thing, plan. Just like anything else, you got to plan your schedule. So again, for that you need data, you need meetings, and then you need a charter, you need the management plan, you need these two policies, procedures, and any organizational process assets are your lessons learned and stuff that you have in the PMO. In the PMO repository, stuff like lessons learned from previous projects, information from previous projects is called organizational process assets. Enterprise environmental factors are all policies that you may have in your company. So these are just your inputs to the planning process. But to give you a more clearer input, your input to schedule is your WBS. That's what your input is to the scheduling process. And so we can look at the scheduling process, these steps. The first step is define activities. So when you decompose the WBS, when you decompose it, if you don't decompose it, it contains the deliverables. If you don't decompose it. the WBS, your secret sauce. But once you decompose it, then it gives you these activities. And this is your work package. Okay, so what it's saying to you as a first step, the very first step, this step here, is to define these activities. Define. So it's a define activities, DA. Define the activities. That's what this is. 6.2, define your activities. And how do you get it? Through decomposition. So decomposition is again showing up here. You decompose your WBS and get your activities. And so what you get after you decompose, you get an activity list, attributes of those activities, how much time, who's going to do it. Milestone list is also another thing you get from decomposing. And then some change requests, some changes. But so main things are activity list. That's what you get from here. And also milestone list is not a bad thing. Milestone list and activity list. Okay. Next step after you get that, what do you do with it? So now that you have this activity list coming from the WBS, now the question is, if I was in a project, where would all this happen? This would be happening in the planning phase. You're sitting with a team, you're telling them, okay, we're going to design this solution, but before we design the solution or design this house, tell me the requirements and let's decompose the requirements by looking at the scope statement. And then once we have the requirements, scope statement, WBS. That's the sequence we're going to go with. Requirements, scope statement, WBS. So we got WBS, we break it down into activity list and milestone list. Milestones are high level with no duration. Milestone are high level with zero duration. Activity list are activities. So you got those two, but you don't know what I need to do first, second, third, fourth. If you're going to put together a house or build a house, you got to know what you have to do first, second, third, fourth, right? So knowing just the activities is not going to help you, but you need to know that as a first step. So first step is find the activities. And then next step is and the milestone list. And then you sequence it, order it. What I need to do first, I need to put the foundation first of the house on which the house is going to be built. Foundation first, right? So that would be how you're sequencing it, that activity based on what you should do first, second, third, fourth. All right, so we're going to talk about leads and lags and things like what are this diagramming, PDM and dependency and all of these good things. We're going to talk about those in the next couple of slides. So for right now, all you need to understand is that once you get the activities, you got to order it. Once you've ordered it, now you can say how long it's going to take to do it. Okay? The next step is how long. This is the how long step or activity duration. How long? First step, WBS. Second step, decompose. Third step, sequence. When you decompose, you get activity list and milestone list. You decompose it. You decompose WBS, get your activity list and milestone list, then you sequence it. After you sequence it, then you estimate the time it's going to take for each of those activities. It's sort of following into place in the right sequence. Okay, so once you know the durations of each activity, you can go and start to build your schedule. Then you can start to build your schedule. And I'm going to show you an easy way of doing that. But again, the basis, okay, Azim, go ahead.
I wanted to make sure I understand it. So does the decomposing of WBS means that it's basically putting into parts every step of the breakdown? If we, let's say, have 7 pieces of the in the execution process. So decomposing would be probably opening up all the pieces and making a sequence out of it.
You are warm. So if you're building a house, keep the house in mind. So it helps you understand this. So if you're building the house, you need the WBS of the house, right?
Yes.
So the WBS of the house at the highest level is all deliverables, right? Deliverables. So these are deliverables right here, which right there. These are deliverables. Which what are deliverables? Electrician. I need electrical work. I need plumbing work. I need framework. I need the roofing. And interior work, right? Those are your deliverables, big blocks of work. And that's what you have in your WBS. Now, in order to get your activity list, this is all happening in the planning phase. Now that you need your activity list, you got to decompose. You got to decompose these deliverables.
Okay.
Decompose electrical block, decompose plumbing block, decompose other blocks that you have in your WBS into its activities, smaller activities, and then you sequence them. And after sequencing, you estimate duration. I think I saw something else. Did somebody else raise a hand or something? Okay.
No, I just gave you thumbs up. I understand. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right. Super. So we got the activities. We got the sequence now. We have got the durations. Once you have these three things, then you can start to develop your schedule. And I'm going to show you how to do it. And so just keep the high level in mind right now. Easy stuff. The rest is all details. The details is not very important. The important stuff is that you should have in your mind what are my building blocks of a schedule. And once you have a schedule, how can I make sure I don't fall behind? Right? What's the point of having a schedule if you're going to fall behind? Right? Schedule. The purpose of schedule is so that you have all your activities in sequence and you know the duration. So you have a plan. Basically, you have a plan now of building the house. What should go first, second, third, fourth? Who's going to do it? How long is it going to take? Once you have that, you should complete your house within the allocated time and the budget. Time is, let's say, 3 months. You should be able to allocate it in 3 months. If you had not created the schedule, it would be chaos. Okay, so that's the reason for creating a schedule. So everything is in order. You're organized now. You're not going to be in chaos. You're just going to follow step at a time. Whether things are happening in parallel or in sequence, linear sequence, doesn't matter. As long as you understand how things are happening, so you can control it. If you don't know how things are happening, you cannot control your schedule. Right? So now you got a good schedule and you got the estimates of how long it's going to take from the team. They are the ones who gave you the activities. Okay, I'm going to pause here and I'm going to tell you a little story because it's important. So I started this project and I asked them for the WBS. They gave me the WBS. So I knew at high level there were let's say 2 teams, A and B. Okay, and I had the leads. A and B, I got the leads, I got the deliverable. Now, I didn't ask for the activities. I said, give me the high level deliverables. Don't break it down too much. I leave it up to you to manage that. So it would have been okay if these 2 people were managing everything and they could control it. Because they were the leads and I was sort of I empowered them to control their own activities. So what happened? One of them did everything fine because I knew the people and I knew what they had to do and they gave me the deliverables and they also broke it down into activities and gave me the duration. So everything was fine. The other team gave me the deliverables and decomposed it barely, but didn't tell me that. And then they started to work on it. And then they started to fall behind. And I asked them, what's going on here? The second team, the B. And the reason that was happening was because when they decomposed their deliverable into respective tasks, they had to go to 2 additional people to do those tasks. So here's a lead. I thought he's going to work on everything. But turns out he is going to do his little bit pass it on to another team. They're going to do a little bit. They're going to pass it on to the third team. They're going to do a little bit. Then it'll be done. So what I was looking at was just one person, and I didn't know there were three persons standing right behind this person who he has to manage, and he wasn't able to manage them, and I wasn't aware. So what was the lessons learned? You have to break it down. You got to make sure you understand what the breakdown is, the activities, and who's going to do it, and how long it's going to take. So make sure once you have that information, then you can create the schedule. You could create a schedule at the deliverable level without the activities. That's called the milestone chart or milestone level. But that's only good once all the activities have been defined and estimated, and then you roll it up to the deliverable level, then that's good. But if you have not defined it well at the task level, decompose it well at the task level, it becomes difficult to get an accurate schedule. So just a little digression there. But anyways, this is it. So let's dive into it. We'll finish it up by 9 o'clock. We'll let you go at 9. Whatever we don't do, we'll do on Wednesday. All right. So let's try to give you some concepts which are theoretical. These concepts are theoretical. They are sort of used, but they are not going to make or break your schedule creation process. They're not going to make or break, but they're concepts that are in the book, and you should need to know. So then, from practical standpoint, they're not very highly critical, but because you could be asked about these things, so you need to know. Okay, hold on a second. Okay, I'm back. So, topics, dependencies. So there are a couple of dependencies, and here they are. Mandatory dependency. You got to have the dependency. And what do you mean by dependencies? Before I construct the framework of this house, I got to have that foundation completed. So foundation is a mandatory dependency. It is a dependency for sure, but it is a mandatory dependency. I cannot do without it. Now, there are some dependencies which are not mandatory, and they are called discretionary. Discretionary dependencies are not mandatory. So for example, if you're painting this room blue, it is a dependency, but this dependency can easily be changed from blue to green. You got to color it. Coloring is sort of mandatory, but what color, that's sort of discussion left up to you. And so, but you cannot say that I'm not going to have a foundation because I don't feel like it. No, it's a mandatory. You got to have it, right? So, and then you have some external dependencies and some internal dependencies. So you could have an external dependency that you have to maybe connect to something entity that is already in the system that you need to connect to. An external dependency. Something outside the project impacts something internal to the project. Example, application deployment team can't install the application until infrastructure team provides the required setup. So there's another team that has to do something that's external to your team, but it has to be done. So that's an external dependency. Internal dependency could be something that is within your system, and you got to have, let's say, you got to have electricity before you can start the work. So that's an internal dependency. Or you got to have the setup before you can start the work. Or you got to have the space before you can start the work. All of that are internal dependencies. So keep those dependencies in mind. Mandatory, discretionary can be changed, may or may not be used. So example, order of developing an application, various modules. So again, here the order is not important. It's discretionary. It's needed, but it's discretionary. You can change it. So mandatory, you gotta have it. All right, so that's one concept that hopefully is clear. The other concept is, and these are all dependencies, right? As you're building a schedule, you gotta know the sequence of what should happen first, second, third. And when you look at the sequence, you're looking at, is this a mandatory sequence? Is it something you got to do? Or is it a discretionary sequence, right? A sequence. So All right. What is this lead and lag? Lag is easy to understand. Lag is the space between two tasks. You got two tasks here, a bunch of tasks here, and a singular task here, and there is a lag of 1 day, let's say. So that's a lag. Easy to understand, easy to explain. Lead, be careful how lead is. You got two tasks, one is overlapping the other. So, and this task, let's say task A and task B. The B has started, but A has not finished yet. So there's a lead time here before the task B can start. This is the lead time. So if the A has already started, and now the task B starts, there is a lead time that's here that B has to be aware of. That B has a lead time of 2 days before it starts. So A has already started, and before B starts, it has a lead time of 2 days before B starts. So A has already started, it's 2 days already in, and now the B task can start. So there's a lead time of 2 days. So before I can start teaching, I want to make sure that I've sent out information already to you guys a day before, 2 days before. So I have 2 days lead before my class starts because I've already sent it 2 days earlier. So after 2 days, my class is going to start. So I have a lead of 2 days before my class starts, let's say. So that's what lead is. So keep this diagram in mind in case you get lost, or you can always refer back to this diagram. All right. Float and lag are very close. And so the definition of float is the amount of time an activity can be delayed without delaying the end date of the project. Memorize this. Memorize, because that's the only way you will get it. The amount of time an activity can be delayed without.
That should be without.
Yeah,
I was reading that. It's like, wait, what?
Yeah, without. So without delaying the end date of the project. Okay, so just keep that float in mind, and we may see it again. Come back again. So that's why this chapter has a lot of concepts that are difficult to sort of see it like risk was, but you just have to live with it. So let's keep going, and I think after you go through it, you may find some of these explained clearly. But I think for right now, just keep this definition in mind. Remember them if you can get them. All right. So milestone. Milestone is easy. Milestone is easy because remember we said once you decompose, you should get a milestone list and you should get a activity list. Activity is easy. It's just a task. Milestone has zero definition, zero duration. Milestone has zero duration. Milestone could be training completed. So training completed is a milestone. It doesn't tell you when it started. It doesn't tell you when it ended. It just said training completed, and that's a milestone. If you could say training 3 days, that's not a milestone. That's it. That could be a deliverable or could be a task. Deliverable or task has a duration. Milestone does not. It has zero duration. Again, another definition. You got to keep that in mind. Remember it. Memorize. So this will kind of show you a little bit about the network diagram. Network diagram. This is what they mean by network diagram. And it has tasks and these connectors that connect tasks. And in between, you can have a lag here, And here, these things here, the FS, finish, start, start to start, start to start. We're gonna look at them in a minute. So we'll come back to this one. Finish to finish. So just keep that in mind. We're going to look at that. See, some of them are a little confusing. So let's go look at those in a second. There we go. So here is example of what do we mean by FS: finish to start, start to start, finish to finish, start to finish. These are dependencies. These are dependencies. And PDM, this PDM stands for precedence diagramming method. Okay, PDM. So under PDM, you have these dependencies. There are 4 dependencies. Finish to start. You got to finish a task before you start the next task. Foundation before frame. Finish to start. Okay. Now these dependencies come into play when you start scheduling in Microsoft Project Plan or any other project planning tool. Okay. And that's where you see these. You will not see them in an Excel spreadsheet because you cannot create them. These are automatically done. So these tools of scheduling, they're part of the scheduling tool. But what you got to understand is what do you mean by this? So finish to start means you got to finish task A before you can start task B. Makes sense, right? So you got to start task A, foundation, before you can start task B, frame, because foundation comes first. That's FNS. Most of the dependencies are like this, are FS dependencies, finish to start. But there are some other ones that are sometimes used. So let's look at some other ones which are not natural. See, this one is a natural one. Yes, this is the one we just talked about, right? Finish to start. So before B starts, A has to finish. Now the other one is, let's take this one. Start to start. So when you start A, B sort of starts at the same time, but it depends on A. They both start, but B starts on A, sort of starts. So they start the same time, but B depends on A. The finish to finish, B finishes first, but it depends on A to finish also at the same time. So B finishes first, but depends on A to finish as well. But it depends on A and the finish to finish. That's this one. This one is start to finish. So let's just look here. Cannot finish unless you start something else. Cannot finish until you start A. B cannot finish until you start A. B cannot finish until, so you got to memorize these things otherwise, or draw these pictures. So B cannot finish unless you start A, and then finish to finish, which is this one, game ending and closing the food area. So they both have to finish at the same time, but they depend on, B depends on A. They both have to start at the same time, but B depends on A. Finish at the same time, but B depends on A. So they're like that. This is the more normal kind, which we use all the time. And this one is where you start, you finish something, but this has to start. This finish something, but this has to start before you finish this B. A has to start. So depending the particular situation in your schedule, you may use these 3, but they're not used very often. These two could be used. Sometimes sometimes you have two starting at the same time, so you could have start to start. These starting at the same time, or you could have two who are finishing at the same time, so you could have finish to finish. They're both sort of finishing at the same time, starting at the same time. You could use those start to start, finish to finish. This one is more normal kind where B has to. B depends on A, so B was not going to start until A finishes. So it's always behind. A is always behind B. This is the easiest to remember, and it's the more natural kind. You cannot take the next class unless you finish. You cannot take the this class unless you finish the previous class. This is that one, FS. All right, so just these things you have to memorize. There's no other way. Memorize these diagrams. Memorize these examples. Memorize these diagrams. I don't know how else to explain these. All right. Network diagram. Estimating techniques. Okay, estimating techniques. Let's look at those. So they are page 199, I believe. Let's see. Yeah. Okay, so there we go. 199. So let's these are, one is that you're most aware of top down, right? You're aware of top down estimation. When you're estimating the duration, how long will it take to complete the foundation of this house? So you're trying to estimate. So here you are. You're looking at the foundation and you're trying to estimate. So by looking at the slab here, you are saying maybe it'll take 3 days. So you say approximately 3 days. That's a top down. It's also called analogous. Okay, just looking at it face value, not knowing a whole lot, just estimating, thumbs up, 3 days. And then you bring in a person who knows about the slab, and he looks at it, and he says I'm going to use, I'm going to say it's going to take exactly 2.5 days. And this is a contractor. Okay? Now you have a contractor. This was you. You say approximately 3 days. Here comes the contractor. He says, no, it's going to take exactly 2.5 days. He is using the bottom up method, which is also called the number of bottom up. There's one called 3-point estimating. 3-point estimating on page 200. The 3-point is one which is also called triangular distribution, and the way they do it is the pessimistic plus optimistic plus most likely divide by 3. So by pessimistic could be, I say, pessimistic worst case, 3 days. Optimistic best case, I say 2 days. Most likely 2.5 days. You just add them up and you divide by 3, and you get here like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.5 over 3 is 3 to the 6, 3 to the 6, 2.5. So 3-point estimate, it says 2.5, and so here is a rough method. This is a more accurate method. The 3-point, or it's called triangular distribution method. Okay, so keep that in mind. There is another one called they call this one expected beta distribution. So there's another one, beta distribution, which this one is more popular. There's another one which is like which says pessimistic plus 4 times most likely plus optimistic divided by 6. There's another one that you can use. So between those, I think you should be in good shape. Let's see if there's something else in these. So standard deviation, like this one here, the standard deviation, this is equal to pessimistic minus optimistic divided by 6. Standard deviation, pessimistic, worst case scenario, plus minus best case scenario divided by 6. So, so you got that one in case, so there's a bunch of them, but this is the most used, the bottom up 3-point or triangular, but you can also use this one, and standard deviation you can also use that one, but this is the one that's preferred. Okay. All right, so that's that. And this is just another visual of what I was talking about. This was the beta distribution, this one, we looked at that, and looked at the triangular one, which is this one, and standard deviation, which is this one. And so this was your initiation, you do the top-down analogous, planning, you do parametric, and final, you do 3-point. The 3-point is the best one, and then before we start into execution, you take, so this is like, as when you start the project, everything is high level. Go into planning, you are able to estimate better, and then you finally use 3-point, and your estimates for duration are pretty good at this point. So the accuracy goes up. All right, these are just explaining to you the same thing that I just explained to you. Just look at them for additional clarification. All right, so we are now going to talk about agile. Agile method of estimation. The one I like is this t-shirt sizing. So you have a task A and a task B or a task C. Obviously, this is going to be your user story A, user story B, and a user story C. You can say, this is a t-shirt size. This is large. This is a lot of stuff I need to do. Large size. This is medium size. This would be small size. So that's how they do it. Large, medium, small. So remember, these are all qualitative sizing, right? These are all qualitative. They also have this one called planning poker. This one is quantitative. And so planning poker, it's on the book, if you look at page 205, what you do is let's say you have A, this A. You get a bunch of team members. Look at A. You're looking at A, and he's saying it's going to take me 3. This one is saying it's going to take me 2. This one is saying it's going to take me 7. This one is kind of high compared to 3 and 2. So they're going to discuss until they all agree to a number. After they discuss it a couple of times, they all say, okay, we're gonna give it a 3. 3 days or whatever the duration is. 3 days, 3 hours, 3 weeks, whatever it is. Again, for user story B, they each are going to come up with a number. This is going to say, oh, I think it's going to take me 5. Oh, I think it's going to take me 2. Oh, I think it's going to take me 10. They're all going to, because this one is too high compared to these two, they're all going to talk to him. So why do you say it's 10? I'm saying 5, I'm saying 2, you're saying 10. Then after discussion a couple of times, they're going to say, okay, it's 5. This is called playing poker. This is called playing poker, estimating based on numeric numbers, and they use so they have a bunch of cards with numbers on it, and they're going to pull out a number and then display it. This is how much I think it's going to take for me to complete. Any questions thus far? Okay, all right. So those are the popular ones. Whenever you see this affinity and all that, this is like you categorize. Categorize. So these two are part of affinity. These two are infinity ways of sizing. We categorize and then you decide. Categorize based on qualitatively or quantitatively. So next is basis of estimates, and one of them is this fist of 5. Who can tell me what the fist of 5 is?
Voting, maybe?
Voting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
It's just another consensus.
Consensus based, page 206. It's on 206. Consensus based. And then you got critical path method. So critical path method is another way to find out the best path to getting to the end. If this is the end and you have a path like this, you find out what is the critical path. So you count the paths. You got 1 path 2, path 3. Okay, you got 1, 2, 3. So let's say 3, 4. That's a 3, 4, 5, 6. It'll take 6 days. Let's say to do this. This is 1, 2, 3, and this. So this is also 6. If you go take 1, 2, 3, and 4. So that's 3, 4, 5, 6. So this is like 3, 9. I'm sorry, 7, 8, 9, 10. So this is going to take 10 days to go path 3. 10 days. So the critical path is going to be the longest path. So your critical path is going to end up being this path. The longest path. And what that means is that's your backbone. Your critical path is your backbone. In order for you to walk, you need your backbone completely, right? You need your backbone completely. You cannot say, I am going to take off my backbone and then be able to walk correctly. You need every piece of your backbone, vertebrae, every piece. And that's your backbone of the network. So this could be the foundation of your house. This could be a foundation. This step could be a foundation right here. This step. This could be then something else. But foundation is in your backbone, which means you cannot build the house without the foundation because it's in your backbone. So critical path is the longest path of the network. or of your schedule. Network, you can say schedule. Critical path is the longest path of the network or of your schedule, and it's the path that you cannot mess with. You cannot mess with this path, because if you mess with this path, you are not going to reach the end of your project, because every component in that path is essential. The other paths that you have, you can mess with them a little bit and you still be okay, because they're not on the critical path. So sometimes when you are putting together your schedule, people are saying, hey, we got to complete this task because it's on my critical path. And you might be wondering, what the hell is he saying or she is saying? What he or she is telling you is that whatever they're working on is very critical to the success of the project. It's on the critical path, and that we cannot mess with it. We need the time, we need the resources, we need all the efforts to get this task done. So that's what that is. All right. So these are all about the your reserve analysis. We talked about that, management reserve and your contingencies. Let's see if we can find this here. Okay, so that's that. Let's keep going. So this is a critical concept from a PMP standpoint, and has to do with the schedule. So once you have the schedule, now you need to worry about being on time, on track. So if you're on track, great. If you're on track, no worries, no problem. If you're off track, what do? You have two options. Either you fast track or you crash your schedule. So fast tracking means you run sort of in parallel. So this is how you were scheduled. And then you said, hey, I'm running behind and I need to speed up. Okay, then do your tasks in parallel. There's a risk involved here, obviously. Risk goes up, right? But that's one way of fast tracking if you're falling behind. But the risk is that it can cause issues when you start to do things in parallel, when you were not originally scheduled that way. The other way to fast track, or I'm not fast track, I mean to improve your scheduling sequence, is to crash the project. And you may have heard this, or you will hear this. Let's crash the project. Crash the project? What do you mean by that? That means we're going to add more resources. So you had 2 resources, now you're adding 3. So now you're crashing the project. And by adding more resources, you are doing what? Cost goes up. In the first case, the risk went up. In the second case, you said, I'm going to crash the project, give me more resources, and you got one more person. And what happened? Fine, we were able to make it, but at a cost.
Instructor, I have a question. When you
Sure.
crash the project, you do that when you don't have any more float left, right?
Yes. So
And when you have like extra resources.
yeah, I mean you are let's say you have this backbone, right? This critical path. You have this critical path, and you are falling behind. So these are the things you can either do crash on them, or you can do fast track on them. And usually these are very tightly bound tasks. This is the longest path, and this is where you actually do the crashing or fast tracking to this critical path. You can have two of these kind of run in parallel, or you can have more people added on the critical path to improve the schedule. You know, there's no point in fast tracking on or crashing on these other paths, right? Because they are not critical. They're small paths, and even if you do something here, the main path that's going to make or break your project is the critical path. So here is where you do your crashing and fast tracking.
So it'd be okay if the non-critical path items, if they're like pushed back, as long as it doesn't affect the critical path.
Yeah, you can actually what you could do is you can take a resource which is right here and say, hey, why don't you join this guy here and leave what you're doing because it's not on the critical path. And then you can move this resource and join this one and crash the project by removing this one here. You will lose something here, but because it's not on the critical path, the house is not going to fall or crash or get destroyed because the pillar of the house is in this critical path. So you're not going to touch the pillar, you're not going to touch the foundation, you're not going to touch the roof. You may touch the swimming pool. Or you may not do that, or jacuzzi. You may leave the jacuzzi, which are not on the critical path. You can do without the jacuzzi, right? And you can do without the swimming pool because they're not on the critical path. But you cannot do without the roof. You cannot do without the framework, the foundation, and the interior of the house because they're all on the critical path. All right. So hopefully that was clear. We got 5 minutes, so let's just keep going here.
Yes, thank you.
Sure. Okay, this is another concept that is also important from the PMP standpoint, and this is about resource leveling. So this is giving an example of what do we mean by resource leveling versus resource smoothing. So here we go. This is how it is. You got 1, 2. So this is the 40-hour limit. Some of your resources are actually working more hours. This person is working. It's in red because he's working more than 40 hours. This one is working just about right. This one is not working 40 hours. So there's some hours here and there's some hours here. Okay, so you have to level the resource because some of your resources are sitting idle, others are not. So what you do is you start to resource level them. So here this long one, you kind of divvy it up, and they're all green. But you saw what happened. The schedule went from 4 weeks to 5 weeks, and that is a risk. So when you do resource leveling, you can level the resources, give everybody fair share of the load. So everybody is, holding on to the load fairly, but it's going to the net effect is that the schedule is going to move forward. And so there are drawbacks to this. The drawbacks, the advantage is, okay, you get everybody to be working less than 40 hours, so you save some cost here, but you lost some cost here. So keep that in mind. Now, smoothing, on the other hand, is where you do the same thing without losing or adding this extra time here, and that's called smoothing. So best thing is to smooth it out so that you don't you don't slip the schedule. Okay, so keep that in mind. In Agile, what they do is they have these release plans. That's how they kind of safeguard. How does that work? Here's a sprint, and here's another sprint, and here's another sprint. So you had 5 user stories here, user stories. You're working on, you completed 4 of them. Then the one that you didn't do, you added to this one. If this had 4 for this one, you added that one that you didn't complete here. And that's how you sort of, took care of it. And then you did not release it here. You didn't release the app. Then you did your next sprint, and then you released it here. And now this is where you released the app. You did your sprint. You did not release it to the customer until you finished number 3, and then you released it, and all 3, the deliverables from all of them, and now you have release 1.0 of whatever. So there is no leveling. It's just that if you're falling behind, you just do what you just accomplished 4. The one that you did not accomplish, you accomplished it in the next sprint. You added that in to this one. Now this became 5, and so here, because you did not complete 5, you did not release. You did not release. In this one, you completed. You could have released it here, but you did one more. Then you released it here. Okay, so that's your release plan. Is when will I release my application after it's totally done? Totally done. All right. So another definition is velocity for agile. Velocity. So you have this sprint, right? You got these sprints. So you're doing 5 user stories in this sprint 1. In this sprint, you did 5 user stories. Sprint 2. In sprint 3, you are going to assume that your velocity is 5 and that you are going to take 5 and complete them. Why? Because here your velocity was 5. This was 5 user stories per sprint, and then next sprint you kept doing 5 user stories, so your velocity stays at 5. And now for the new sprint, you are going to say, you know what, I'm going to make my velocity equal to 5, and I better make it, because I already seen my velocity. Average velocity is 5, so my next velocity is going to stay at 5. So it's just another way to sort of gauge how you're performing, how your team is performing. So if let's say your velocity goes from 5 to 3, so here was 5, it went to 3, and now your average velocity is 5 plus 3, 8, divided by 2 is 4. Now your velocity went to 4. So here, now you are thinking, I hope I can do 5 as I had done in the first sprint. And, so at least you know that your average velocity from the first 2 sprint is no longer 5, it's 4. Based on the previous 2, is 4 now. Before it was 5, now it's 4 because you did 3, on this, in this particular example. And so, but basically this is the definition. Velocity is equal to story points. Story points is user stories, also called story points. Story points divided by the sprint. So here the velocity was 5. Story point was 5. Divided by sprint 1. So this is 5. Next was 8. 8 divided by 2, 4. Next one was 5. So it was 5. So it was 5. It was 13, right? 13. So sorry. So this would be so it would be 13. It would be 13 divided by 3, which is 3, 4, so 3 points, 3 to 9, 10, or 12, 3.6. So your velocity is decreasing. Actually, it was 5 on the first sprint. Second sprint you had 3, so 8 divided by 2 became 4. So velocity becomes 4. Then it became 5 again. So 5 plus 3, 5 plus 3, 8, 8 plus 5, 13. 13 divided by 3 is 3.6. So velocity was 5, 4, 3.6. So velocity is going down after every sprint. So that is not good. That means you are slowing down your performance. Your performance is slowing down. So you watch your velocity and try to keep either stay on the average velocity or monitor so that you don't your velocity don't go to a level where you are losing your performance. Okay, so this is another example of lead and lag. You can look at it on your own. The same free float. So if you notice, the free float is almost like the lag here. So when we come back, we're going to take up the scheduling, how we're going to actually schedule. So this is how we actually schedule. We're going to talk about how we actually schedule, given that we have the dependencies, given that we have the activities, given that we have the milestones, given that we sort of have an idea about the critical path, the longest path. How can we draw the schedule, which is shown here? So on Wednesday, we're going to draw the schedule and try to put these pieces together that we sort of looked at thus far. Yeah, these are just additional examples and some problem that you could do. All right, so that's it for now. We will continue on Wednesday and do some problems on Wednesday from both chapters. All right? Okay, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you
Bye.
everyone. Bye-bye.